my frame is. Uh,
Sorry, I started recording. I'll just cut this out. Will you see what do you mean?
I
Okay, we're now joined by Alex Megaro, who has been an editor and producer on WTO/99. Excellent new documentary. Everyone should run, not walk to go see wherever possible. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And I have to start with the obvious filmmaker question. How did you get involved in making WTO 99?
Oh man, so it's actually it goes back almost 8 years. So my filmmaking partner and I made this with my longtime filmmaking partner and editing partner, Ian Bell. He's the director and my co-editor on this. We discussed it about 8 years ago as a thing we wanted to tackle, a topic that we are both kind of obsessed with. And this coincided with us getting into archival filmmaking. So back then, we had made a short archival, fully found footage archival film called 808 How We Respond. It was about the false missile alert that happened in Hawaii in 2018. And that was our first foray into working in this style. And from there, we ended up using that as a proof of concept to get it turned into a web series at Vice. We had 2 seasons of a series called Source Material. This is a fully found footage archival short documentary series. We made about 22 episodes over the course of 2.5 years, including a couple longer ones and a 1 hour television special about the January 6th riot. And throughout this entire process, we had WTO in the back of our heads. We always hoped we could get something where we could explore this style we were honing of fully found footage, fully archival, no voiceover, no interviews, minimal text. That's how we were putting these stories together. They were recreations of events that happened from many different vantage points. In source material, it was often something captured on camera phones from many different angles, and we would recreate this to the best of our ability using these different angles, sometimes using continuity editing and what have you. And so we had this series, we had honed this style, and WTO was the holy grail for us, the thing we always wanted to make a film about. And the reason it was so important to us was twofold. So for Ian, he's a little older than me. He had just left the United States to live abroad right when the WTO protests happened. And he's a Seattle native. He was born there, raised there, and left right when this happened. And he returned right after 9/11. So he missed a very important chunk of American history and a really important event that happened in his hometown. And it was a thing that he was getting letters from friends who were there on the ground, giving him the story of what was happening. And so he had real hard information from people who participated. And then, he's seeing the media reporting on it and doesn't quite compute. So it was a mix of needing to or wanting to explore this story to understand it for him, for this thing that was very important to where he was born, raised, but he couldn't participate in, and also try and get to the truth of what actually happened, which for, in his case, he was getting different reports from what was being reported in the media. In my case, I was about 12 when this went down, and what I remember vividly was watching the news at night with my parents. I'm on the East Coast, so it wasn't as big a deal insofar as like a constant report on the news, but it was touched upon, of course. And I remember the Starbucks window being broken and me being told by the news I'm supposed to feel really, really bad about this. And that was my memory of it. And there's a thing that stuck with me because even as a kid, that seemed a little odd. And then as I got older, I explored it more. I came to a similar conclusion as Ian that the reporting on this just didn't seem right, that it was being brushed under the rug in many ways, and there was a larger story to be told. So once we had this short film that led to a series that led to us gaining the ability to get financing for this feature film, it was the story we wanted to tackle, and it coincided as well with the digitization of the IMC archive, the Independent Media Center, which a lot of footage in the film is from there. They're being referenced in the film. You see the actual location briefly, but this digitization project brought in. It was the first time this archive of 400 hours of footage was being digitized, all from citizen journalists, a mix of amateurs, professionals, and just people who were working in independent media that was all saved for 20 plus years, then being preserved in a box under someone's stairs, then given to this archive, and then being digitized. And that was the initial footage drop that we got, which was, like I said, 400 hours. And over the course of this project, we accrued another 600 hours from various sources, international media, network news, other people who just had tapes in their basement. And we just had this, and a public archive from Seattle City, which is how we gained access to all of the police footage. Like the cops were out there with little camcorders, and we have many of their tapes as well. So yeah, we put this thing together and we got access to 1,000 hours of footage and whittled it down into an hour 40 feature that hopefully is coherent.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad you did, because I'm like, this event I have long been fascinated by. I don't remember it. I was 8 when it happened, but it's kind of, I think about this sometimes, how, you know, we have younger listeners who are like curious about Occupy Wall Street, or maybe Bernie 2016, and or Black Lives Matter in 2014. And this is kind of was a similar thing for me, and I think a lot of people my age and our age, it's like we were too young to be in on it or really be that aware of it, but it kind of lives on in this almost legend. But and so I'm so glad you were able to do an archival look at this, because there's been movies made about this. There's you know, documentaries before, but nothing quite like this. There was a Hollywood movie, which you don't have to give me your opinion on if you think it's going to get you in trouble. I am not a fan of that one. But I am curious though. Yeah, what do you think?
I was just gonna say, after at many Q&As after this film, I tell everyone they should go check it out because it is very funny.
Yeah,
Watch
it's
WTO 99, then watch Battle in Seattle, and you'll get a kick out of it.
Yeah, it's sort of surreal because it's like has all the like classic. It's just a very Hollywood movie and has a bunch of tropes, some sexist tropes and stuff. But it's like about like a left wing thing. Like the ethos is not like corporate in Hollywood, but it's still like presented in that mode. So it's kind of strange to watch in that respect. But you know, kudos to them for making that movie. But this one's definitely better. I will say.
I'll take it.
The Starbucks window itself has kind of become bigger than it should be. It's like a I don't know, it's like a symbol of all this. It's in the song "Baby I'm an Anarchist" by Against Me, which I first heard when I was like 14. It's like a funny song where the guy goes when it came, he's singing, he's an anarchist singing a song to his liberal girlfriend, and he goes, "When it came time to throw bricks through the Starbucks window, you left me all alone," is the line. But it's crazy that specific act from WTO is like so symbolic, right?
It's the thing most people still remember from it. It was ubiquitous. It was shown on TV over and over and over to try and convey this idea of like they're all a bunch of hooligans and they're just breaking stuff. So you know, it's chaos in the street, and that was what they were selling, chaos in the street. And many people, some even in Seattle to this day, that's really what they remember. It's the narrative they remember because that is what was peddled everywhere, and that's one of the big things we were trying to get through in this movie is that, you know, there was a much larger story going on, and that is just a gross oversimplification. And it's also a media tactic we see used today for any protest. One window's broken, suddenly the entire street is filled with hooligans, and it's chaos in the street, and the whole city's burning. But that narrative, they keep doing it, man. It's just the same playbook.
I mean, the funny thing about it to me is always like that you're supposed to be clutching your pearls that it's a Starbucks, like it's like sacred or something, and it's like kind of hilarious because it's, you know, really American. It's like worshiping, you know, McDonald's or whatever, very 90s anti-capitalist sort of jokes happening in your head about it. But like real talk though, like when I was young, I remember hearing about this, and it was the first time somebody really made a distinction about the difference between violence and destruction of property and how those aren't the same thing, and they're trying to equate them as a way of disciplining us. That was the moment. That was the incident that was a perfect example, you know.
Right.
Yeah, there were so many narratives that we want to do some kind of corrective on. And just to jump back to as to other reasons why we wanted to make this film, you know, I remember I met in around 2016, and there was the another pervasive media narrative of, you know, Trump came out of nowhere. American fascism is coming out of nowhere, and we both knew like the seeds were planted so long ago, and you see those seeds at the WTO protests, and in that time, you see it in the film. We knew there were so many connections to today that would be in this story, but again, it's the way we work is because we don't have interviews, because we don't have voiceover, and we barely use text. If it's not in the footage, we can't really explore it. So we give ourselves
Mm.
that handicap, so to speak. However, when we got into it, we saw so many more parallels than we could have imagined when we started. And you see them, they're very clearly in the film, insofar as you see one of the first voices you hear is Bernie Sanders in 1994, and he's saying the same thing. You see Roger Stone for the Trump 2000 campaign with his wonderful HTML website, which kudos to that news report to do that scroll perfectly of the old website. But it's like they're still peddling the same thing, and the attachments to today are so stark that same people, the same actors with the same messaging.
Right. Yeah, and the way you capture it, again, is so masterful because it's a, you know, we recently did an episode on the 2002 Venezuela coup, which was misrepresented in media, and this seems in some ways an attempt to kind of correct the record by showing a beat by beat of like what actually happened during that week or so during the conference. Can you tell us about the decision to make this like very chronological?
Yeah, we were trying to figure out the best way to tell the story. And there's so many ways you can go when you have 1,000 hours of archival. It could become more essayistic. But you know, we had already done this January 6th piece that I mentioned that we had done for Vice was chronological. It was called 187 minutes, and it was the time between Trump giving a speech saying, "Let's all go to the Capitol," and then to the time he got on Twitter and it's like, "I love you all, you're correct, but please stop." And we kept a clock on screen, and we tracked every clip that we had to within a minute that it happened, and we did this full chronological recreation that really helps you understand the ebb and flow of an event like that. And so when we were trying to figure out how to structure WTO 99, we very quickly landed on this really rigid chronology because we had so much footage and so many times we'd have multiple angles on the same incident that we just decided the best way to fully understand this for both Ian and I to understand, but we think for a larger audience to really get what happened is to not jump around in time, but to do it perfectly chronological. So you see how the buildup happens, how the arm of power comes down on the protesters 3 hours into their protest. They're getting gassed at 10 in the morning. And I don't think that hits unless you see the small buildup and then that hammer comes down super quick. And you see how that affects the rest of the protest over the course of the next few days. Like that initial violence, the initial gassing is the pall over everything, and everyone is reacting to that for the next few days. It's not structured like a typical dramatic film or the way many documentaries are edited to follow maybe a traditional narrative 3 act structure or something like that. We just decided to go with the ebb and flow of these events, and it really it just helps you understand it in a way that I don't think you could if told differently.
Right. It was kind of like being there. Um, one more question about like this the production process. You are the editor slash producer. Ian Bell is the director. But since it's archival, what does that mean? What is he actually directing there, and how did that sort of co-working relationship go?
Well, it's amazing because working with Ian, we have been co-editors on projects for so long that we have this kind of symbiotic brain, and we're both always seemingly going for the same thing, just it's down to the details of how we might handle a sequence or whatnot. But we also pass stuff off to each other. So for example, this thing is edited, it's chronological and also geographical because you had to tackle the different intersections. So basically, on the first day of the protests, protesters would they had this strategy to shut down the intersections that lead to the convention center where the WTO delegates were meeting. They wanted to make sure no one had access, and that would in turn delay the meetings or cancel them entirely, was their main goal. But you can see they have the strategy to go to each intersection, shut it down by peacefully sitting and blocking access. And, Ian's specialty, having come from Seattle, is he understands the geography of that, and he can handle that aspect at times while I might be on the time of day and constructing that, and we pass it back and forth. Uh, Ian being the one who made that initial connection with the archive in Seattle, him being the Seattleite, this was kind of his baby before, and he and I have been discussing it forever, but this was like his kind of thing. So I guess it would be, in the end, final say, we defer to Ian. But at the same time, I'm so heartened that I have this partnership with him where we never really fought over anything throughout this process. And I know that sounds like it's rosy colored glasses, but we have worked in this style and with this kind of footage for so long that we know usually how to achieve a certain goal or how far we can push the footage while still keeping it coherent. So it just comes down to, I'm fortunate I have such a great collaborator in him, and that it's a real partnership making something like this.
Yeah, super important. Um, One of the themes in this movie seems to kind of be liberal baby boomers, of which there are a few represented here, that are kind of coming to terms with the world that they're creating. This is the end of the '90s, end of history, etc. Clinton has signed GATT, NAFTA, WTO, etc. Um, and he, as we talked about on the show before, he signed something, I think, after these protests that was like, well, I didn't mean to do that part. When it came to the WTO with like labor and environmental standards, he was kind of like trying to backtrack on some of it, but it didn't really matter. And then also Paul Schell, who's the mayor of Seattle. What can you tell us about sort of that generational dynamic between the protesters, which, to be fair, there are a lot of older people out there, but a lot of young ones as well, and the opposition to the protests, which seemed to come not even from the right in America so much as the liberal center.
Yeah, there's so much there. And actually one of those things is another one of the reasons I wanted to tackle this event specifically, because we see it as it's a major hinge point in American history and activist history. It's also, you see the Democrats losing the labor vote almost in real time, where you have the unions came out. What's amazing about these protests is it's a cross-class coalition and kind of across the political divide coalition. People all came out on the street who you wouldn't expect normally team up on anything, and they were teaming up against a greater evil, so to speak, like a singular opponent that they knew was so bad, gonna fuck all of them so badly, that it was worth teaming up with your maybe political opponents, so to speak. And that in itself is very special. It's a thing that we're told can't happen in the United States. The media narrative is always the class coalitions and cross political divide coalitions are impossible here. This is proof that it's not. And it also was the labor class and the working class just screaming, "This is what we need," to their Democrat overlords. And the all the government is, from the mayor up to the president, Democrat, and they just kind of go, "Yeah, too bad," and we're gonna make this hell for you on the street. It's fascinating to see them kind of grappling with it in real time, but also not fully grasping the decisions they're making. At least I don't think. Insofar as Mayor Paul Schell has that press conference where he says a line that gets a laugh in almost every screening. He goes, I didn't want to. He didn't want to gas people in the streets on this day, but he goes, we had people that marched in the '60s, okay,
Right.
in our government. Like we didn't, like we've been on the other side of this, as if that excuses uh, giving the commands to get as violent as possible against these
That's
protesters.
that's worse, right?
Yeah.
In some ways,
You don't
yes.
learn anything.
Yeah. And you see that palpably throughout. And you also see it from the something that's fascinating as well is they encounter Tom Hayden on the street. And he says something that's core to this movie and to this event, that in the '60s, he saw an intelligence document that said what was it? The entire game now is perception management. the making sure that people do not perceive protest as a means to be successful. They do not perceive collective action as a means to be successful. And you see that in so many ways throughout this film, from just the way the media is reacting, sometimes in real time. We have this incredible ability due to the crazy amount of footage that we had to do kind of real time media checks where you see how national news and local news is covering maybe like something happening at that very moment, and we can cut to the street what's happening at that very moment, and it's a completely different thing than is being reported upon. Part of that perception management. There's something near the end of the film where Peter Jennings says, the protests are ending, and he very flippantly says, the protesters are all going home and they'll move on to some other cause that moves them. And you can feel him rolling his eyes. And that's part of that perception management too. It's making the viewer just go, these protesters are so silly. They're such dumb kids. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. But then we have the ability to show that local news reporter on day 2, where she says they're so confused in the streets. They have no idea why they're even protesting. Cut to a guy on the ground at that very moment saying the TV stations are not telling you why there's a protest. And he's handing out paper with like bullet points on it. This is why there's a protest, and going around handing it person to person. So that conflict is constant.
That's like a playbook that they trot out every time, and it's
every time.
It's a lot of it's like solidified in this moment. There's like a police militarization stuff that reaches its first level in this moment. A lot of interesting origin points in the WTO protests.
Right.
Yeah,
the police militarization point was really interesting because there's so much watching this thing that was recorded in 1999. There's a lot that looks familiar. And then other things that really don't. It's like, well, this is a totally different era, but then other things like the way people talk and dress, like it's a little bit of both. It's something really familiar, but then something of a totally foreign world. But the one thing that's definitely antiquated is the police cruisers are like older cars. And it was kind of like a blast from the past, seeing like sort of newer looking people and things, and then this old ass car.
We're in between Tim Burton Batman and Christopher Nolan Batman historically here. So
right.
Everything hasn't been turned into a tank just yet.
Yeah, but that's why
they're trotting out the proto tank in this one. And interesting to the police response and the militarization. So that was another connection that Ian and I had seen to today, is like this militarization was happening. It was bubbling, but this was the first large scale use of the militarized police force to try and quell American protesters. There were many weapons and tactics that were experimental that were used for the first time. The pepper balls that they're shooting out of their rifles are basically paintballs that explode with pepper in your face. Those were experimental weapons. This is the first documented use against American protesters. Kettling as a tactic. This is the first documented use against American protesters. All the cops coming out in the riot gear with the elbow pads, the knee pads, the chest protectors. This is the first documented use of that against American protesters. So this was a real testing ground for crowd control, if you want to call it that, and various tactics, to the point, excuse me, to the point where video and reports from the WTO protests were used to teach police precincts all over the country how to not make the same mistakes that they did in Seattle. And it became a teaching tool for, just further sophistication of police tactics against Americans.
Right. And there's a character in the movie, Norm Stamper, who was the police chief at the time, and, ends up having to really be a bootstrap cop against these protesters, but then later is like, oh shit, this was bad. I shouldn't have done that. I made a lot of wrong calls, and goes on to be like a reform advocate. He's someone who I wish was not 89 years old, because people often ask, like, well, who's Zoran's police chief going to be? Name a good cop who's actually going to do that. Like Norm Stamper, he would be great. I hope he's at least can be a consultant or something, but he's, at the end of his years. But can you tell us about his trajectory and how you sort of uncovered him as a character in all this?
Excuse me. Yeah, he had a fascinating arc that it was unknown to me when I started working on this project, and we just kept uncovering more and more. So, uh, Norm Stamper on day one of these protests, he's the chief of police of the SPD, and he gave the call to use chemical weapons on the protesters. And there's a press conference in around, I believe, 4:35 p.m. on day one, where he's being questioned. What kind of are you shooting rubber bullets at the protesters in the street? And he just goes, I don't need to tell you what kind of weapons we're using. He's not nice to the reporter. I should also add, a reporter later on, when Norm is saying people were charging the police lines, that's why they had to use these weapons. A reporter does challenge him, like, directly, and just says, I was there and the protesters were seated and chanting. Said they were seated, they were not rushing, they were seated. I think it's important that just to point out someone was willing to challenge him on that, because a little different than our media today. But you see, he's steadfast. He's saying, I don't have to tell you what kind of weapons we're using. On day three, there's another press conference, and you see him grappling with the mistakes that he made in a way that I can't remember seeing a cop in America ever do publicly, where he outright admits, he said, we trained our police officers to expect violence and then to respond to that with violence. When they didn't receive violence from the protesters, they still only knew to respond with violence because we trained them to expect it. He's almost admitting that the training was wrong. They took the wrong path, and therefore he's admitting a mistake publicly. We trained them wrong, in quotes, and I'm paraphrasing for sure. But really, he's just saying that this was the inappropriate training for what happened. We only trained them to react with violence, not to deal with peaceful protesters. Uh, by one of the last shots of the film, you see him many years later admitting that he made a mistake, and he wishes people learn from his mistakes during the protests in '99, where he said, people should know that the streets do in fact belong to the people. The police in America belong to the people. Something I don't think I've heard a cop say publicly, or just can't recollect. But also, we couldn't get into it in the film because, just to clarify again, if it's not in the footage, we can't really tackle it with the style of film that we've made. So it has to be within the footage to cover it. Norm Stamper resigned put in for his resignation, I believe 6 days after these protests, like immediately, and spent the rest of his career writing books on police reform, doing talks like we have the brief clip from at the end of the film. So he kind of did, a Jimmy Carter kind of thing, where he spent the rest of his life apologizing for being president, or police chief in this case. But yeah, I mean, it's a mix of both. Too little, too late, buddy. You already did your thing. But at the same time, like, he really did dedicate himself to it. And there's something to be said that he really did try to get this message out there,
Yeah.
that he messed up. And there's a wonderful oral history that came out. It was published last year while we were making the film, called 1 Week to Save the World, edited by D.W. Gibson. And it's an oral history. It gives you more extensive information, especially before and in some of the aftermath of the protests. And Norm Stamper's interviewed extensively in there, and he says his heart was never in it from the beginning. Like, he wanted to be on the street with everyone, but he was stuck in his position, and that was giving him conflicted feelings from the beginning. But he acted as a cop and put in to gas everyone at 10 a.m. on day one.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because so many of these issues intersect. So many political issues are intersecting in this one moment. We just talked about police brutality and militarization. There's also trade, which encompasses so many different things. Really, you could say capitalism as a whole was sort of being exposed here. But back to sort of the media framing things. There was this name that the movement behind this had, which was the quote unquote anti-globalization movement. And that seemed like a long time discursive struggle to get people to not call it that. I definitely am guilty of calling it the anti-globalization movement, but that's not really what it was. What sort of label would you give it, if any, and what should people understand about this? And I mean, there's obviously continuities between the protests there and Genoa, other places, to today. But how would you sort of explain this movement and this trajectory to people today?
Sure, I think it would be describing what the WTO was at the time and why people were so mad and why they went into the streets and how this galvanized so many people. So, in short, oh, sorry, my cat needs to be let out of the room. One second.
Oh, it happens.
Go
Believe
have
me,
dinner, buddy.
we know all about it here.
Well, on theme.
Um,
Yeah, he
as
was
long
gonna
as-
smack that handle for a while. All right. Okay, WTO. So basically, you started with GATT, the General Agreement for Tariffs and Trade, which came out of World War II. It was just a way to lower trade barriers and make trade between countries easier. Simple on paper. The WTO was formed over some years. It was a thing discussed for a long time, but it was just a larger entity to control trade. And one of the main reasons people had issue with this is because it is essentially an unelected world body of trade ministers who are put in by governments or, in many cases, by corporations and billionaires. And these people get to overwrite the laws of a sovereign nation. So basically, the World Trade Organization would take control away from local and national governments and have this world body that can just dictate your laws. For example, we democratically elect someone, they're in office, they enact the laws on our behalf. And let's say in the US, hypothetically, we don't want to import items made with child labor. We don't want socks made by 5-year-olds coming to the US. And let's say we don't want that. We say that's illegal. We won't import that. The WTO can come in and then go, you're part of the World Trade Organization, and that is a impediment to free trade. So you don't get to make that decision. And people go, I really don't want my socks made by children in Bangladesh. This is a problem. They could come in and say, let's say we have a law in the books here that is we want carbon emissions at a certain lower level because we want to be able to breathe our air. And then WTO can come in and say, that doesn't work for manufacturing for us. You got to raise your emission rate to here. And so they're coming in and overriding the laws from your own country, from the people that you elected. And that's maybe the larger issue of why people were so mad, or one of the many issues, because it takes away this sovereignty. We don't get to have our own laws. It's actually going to harm the environment. It's going to harm people all over the world. And it was allowing, it was going to make sure that we would lose tons and tons of jobs in the United States. Similar, it was like NAFTA on a grander scale.
Yeah, we just did an episode on this like venture capital city that a bunch of those freaks started in Honduras, and they used that sort of international finance court infrastructure to defend their weird extractive city from the nation of Honduras itself. Because the way that it works is that the corporate interest takes precedent over like an entire country's laws and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah. No, that's inevitably what was going to happen, and people saw it at the time. They knew that's where we were all going, and this is why it galvanized people from far left groups to even to the unions, to students, to normies who were just coming out. There's one of my favorite guys. He's very briefly in the film, but he's the guy who just goes, he's like, those yuppies out there don't give a shit what's happening. He's like, we need a revolution. And that dude's going to be an InfoWars guy in like 3 years. You can tell. But at the moment, he united with everyone else on the street because they all saw what was coming down. And it was actually a truly galvanizing moment for the country and the world, and brought people from all over the US to Seattle, but from all over the world as well. There's Darren from Australia at the beginning of the film, maybe my single favorite person in the whole movie, where back to perception management, the local news reporter, Neil Karlinski, just goes, hey man, what's your name? Why are you here? And you can tell he's expecting this guy in the street to be a total dumbass. Like that he was probably instructed by his station that no one on the street knows what they're talking about. Just get some sound bites for us. And He says, I'm Darren from Australia, and I'm here for my children who aren't born yet. And if they were born now, they would know they were born into a society who doesn't really care about them, who sees them more as a number than as a person. And I feel like that so concisely explains the issue to anyone. And of course, our wonderful reporter is just flabbergasted and kind of slack-jawed and goes, okay, and goes off. And his inability to handle that, to handle someone just articulating this so concisely and so well, it explains so much about what was going on then. Both that perception management, the way the media reported on a thing, the lack of interest perhaps of exploring these issues more deeply, or just maybe a top-down command to not go deeper on this as well. It could be both. But it was there and it's palpable among everyone. But there were people, so many on the street, who were articulate and knew what they were protesting.
Well, that's something that like people are surprised by at every sort of flashpoint like this, from this protest to Occupy to protests that are happening now. There's constantly this like re-questioning of like, who are these people, right? And there's what you're calling the perception management here. There's an active like sort of attempt at a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, where they try to go like, if we just keep driving the narrative that these are like wacko people and that they should not be taken seriously, then they won't be taken seriously. And it kind of seems like it works until like all of the material forces of history result again in people inevitably going, okay, you know what, someone's got to give. Like, what's happening on my TV doesn't make any sense, and it's weird because like protesters consider like these background characters in the official narrative of history. It's always like, don't pay attention to that. But I don't know, I mean, it kind of seems like it doesn't really work. Like, people kind of, at this point, we're living in a world where people on whatever side don't trust the mainstream narratives anymore. Like you said, half of them become InfoWars people, half of them are us, but you have like this sentiment that comes out of the Democrats all the time, where they're like, they're lamenting that the narrative their control of the narrative has been lost. And I think like that's really evident in this kind of popular narrative that took off suspiciously easily after Trump got elected, about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and things like that, being like, oh, these have driven people crazy. But the truth is that they just kind of don't have that control anymore, I guess. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling about this, but yeah, I don't know. I just think it's interesting to look back then and go, actually, it's not that, it doesn't feel that much different. There are smart people, and then there are conspiracy theorists in the streets at these things then and now, and none of it's really changed, no matter how they try to reshape it.
For sure. But also there's you can see how even when someone they get someone on the ground who's going against the narrative, so they have to keep hammering down to get to something to convey the larger media narrative. What I mean by that, a good example is the morning of day 2. There's this guy in a yellow raincoat, and he said he was so pissed off about what happened the previous day and seeing everyone get attacked. He goes, I just decided to sit down right here, and he's doing this kind of lockdown with a little group. And the reporter keeps hammering him. It's like, why are you here? Why are you upset? And he gives answers. I mean, it's not the most media trained guy, as most people were not at the time, but he gives real answers that were thoughtful. And it came down to, so the reporter asked, what group are you here with? And he goes, I'm not with anybody, I'm just here on my own. She goes, but then why are you here protesting? As if like, if you're an individual not part of some larger group, you have no business being there. Why that's the narrative, I mean, we can figure out why, but it's absurd on its face. But she still got to that point to find a way to disregard any of his reasons for being there.
Yeah. The you've been led here kind of narrative it undermines that you would want to do this and agree with it.
How foolish you are.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how this was perceived at the time, and I think it rightly as a predominantly progressive left-wing protest, but there were those right-wing elements that you mentioned, and now that kind of seems like that's the side that won. Like, that's, the WTO now is more or less obsolete for the wrong reasons, like for nationalistic, fascist reasons. But I'm curious if you came across anything that dealing with that tension, like the organizers trying to and strategizing about how to contain those right-wing elements.
Within the footage, not so much. Um, yeah, it didn't come up just because it was mostly about strategy and unification on the street.
Mm.
We were able to get in some elements that are unexpected insofar as there was a Republican councilman who's within the Seattle government probably the only one who wasn't so mad at the protesters, at least that we have footage of. He was the one he's still going, no, just stay on the sidewalk, but you guys should be out here. But he was on their side from the beginning and was talking
Mm.
about WTO being a bad thing. We also had that wonderful clip, very unexpected, of Alan Keyes at
Oh
the
yeah.
Republican debate, making a pretty cogent point. Broken clock. Dweeb Alan Keyes got one thing right, but he's also attacking everyone else on stage with it too, just saying, everyone up here, including John McCain, George W. Bush, which allowed us to get our George W. Bush jump scare into the film, which I'm very happy about. Uh, saying they are all for WTO, while Alan Keyes of all people understands why people are on the streets and are pissed off. So we found a lot of unification, and also at the time, strangely enough, Pat Buchanan was on the side of the protesters until he did go to the protests, from what I've read, and then was not into what was going on the street. It was
Right.
freaking him out, and he got the hell out. But is what I believe went down. But yeah, even he was vocal about being anti WTO, and more or less on the side of the people on the street, if we disregard all his other beliefs. But yeah,
Yeah.
we found a lot of footage of just this unification of people that you don't expect to see. Granted, we were looking mostly in a 4-day span during the actual protest itself, but no one was necessarily on the street trying to protect from right-wing views, at least within that coalition. They were just fighting against the general idea of fascism and whatnot. And there's that wonderful clip where someone on the street is interviewing one of the delegates from the WTO, asking him how everything's going, and the guy said, he's like, it feels kind of like fascism today, and the delegate just kind of laughs at him that fascism could be creeping in. And at that very moment, in the background is a bus filled with riot cops dressed as Darth Vader that just kind of stop behind the delegate and then move on as he's laughing about the concept of fascism creeping in the United States.
Yeah, definitely was resonant for me because I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and that's where the 2008 RNC was. So 9 years after this, just downtown, where I went to high school, is a very quiet place. You could roll a bowling ball down the street, 5 o'clock on a Friday, not hit anyone. Just covered in cops that were like, it was like a few degrees higher than watching footage from this,
Mhm.
just like body armor, tear gas cannons. There's a famous photo of one sitting on Mickey's dining car with a tear gas cannon. This really like led to something. I think that the old cop cruiser I mentioned earlier, after 9/11 and after this, that they became like mini tanks. Like this
Mhm.
really injected a lot of funding into police, crowd control, etc. Um, but as I mentioned, 9/11, as I said just now, it plays kind of a role in this. You allude to this at the end, that there was a demonstration, I believe, planned for the week after 9/11 that potentially was going to be even bigger than WTO, the battle in Seattle. Battle of Seattle. I feel like Battle of Seattle has become the predominant thing to say. I have to correct myself because I want to say Battle in Seattle. I'm curious what
We,
you
we
think about that.
yeah, we
But
purposely didn't use that phrase in the film for a reason,
okay.
just to not get into the debate.
Oh, I didn't realize there's a big debate about it, but
There might
uh,
not be one. We just didn't want to have one.
fair enough.
Keep the pervading name out of it.
I think of makes it sound cooler personally, but in any case, what kind of impact did 9/11 have on this moment?
Yeah, so the protest you're referring to, we don't mention that one by name in the film, but that is true. There was one that was going to happen shortly after that. Yeah, it was the event itself was canceled, and then the people who were going to go protest, kind of the energy fizzled. So, at the end of the film, we explain how after 9/11, the momentum for economic protests subsided. and it just lost momentum overall. And we're not saying it stopped by any means, and I've seen no proof that it stopped, because they did continue, but it just was not, the movement was not nearly as strong, in because it fractured it in many ways. In some cases, people did continue with the economic protests, and there were still some going on around the world. Some people eventually moved on to the anti-war movement, obviously. Some people, 9/11 just fried their brain, and who knows what happened. There were all these different elements happening at once that just were there to squelch the collective power that had been building, and really building to something that I couldn't say what the result would have been if it kept building in the same way. I like to believe there would be a positive result for humanity, but I don't know. However, it was definitely building. When we showed this film it was in Boston, and about 10 union guys came out to the screening. They were there in 99. They were really excited. Had no idea they were going to be in the audience, and we talked to them for a while after, and they gave me the strangest compliment that I've gotten in my life, which was, "You got 9/11 right." Cool. It's going on my business card forever. But what they meant was relating to how it affected the momentum. They said they were going to go to that protest you mentioned. I'm blanking on where it was specifically, but the union was ready to go a week or so after 9/11. Like, they were revved up, and then the event itself was canceled, and then just everyone kind of moved to different things because the state of the country was getting weird. And yeah, it really fractured the movement more than anything, in a
Yeah,
grand way, unfortunately.
ushered in a surveillance state, a security
Yeah.
state, to really put the kibosh on a lot of this stuff. Um, I have one thing I need to interject. I'm sorry, you guys have to know about this. In the background here, I've been on my phone. I apologize. I was Googling to try to figure out if the WTO protests are canon in the universe of the television show Frasier, which takes place in Seattle, because he's a Seattle guy. And inconclusive. I think unfortunately the AI thing is on switched on. I don't know how to turn it off. So I think it provided me a hallucination. I think it's wrong, but it says that there's an episode in which he ends up caught in the middle of the street protests. And I've been searching, and I haven't been able to find it. But if we can find it, we have to do a little bonus content thing on it, because it sounds very funny. I don't think it's real though, unfortunately. Please. But if you're listening and you have input on, you want to argue about what side Frasier's on, please get at us in the Discord and everything. Because he could be either one.
I hope that's real. My God, I do know there's a West Wing episode, of course, that it's kind of tackled it. Might not surprise you. Characters on the West Wing were more on the side of globalization than the protesters on the street.
Right. That's the one where Toby owns the protesters. Like,
Yes.
he says what he's going to say to them, and you don't actually see the interaction, but it resolves in them just being like, "Oh, you're right. Never mind. Let's
Naturally, yeah.
Right.
Toby's always right.
Yeah, which is like, that's the trade ends up being the one thing that the Luke Savage wrote a piece on this a while ago, that the only thing the Bartlett administration actually accomplishes in the canon of the West Wing is some trade agreement, and it's a very like Clintonian, like, this, and that was a liberal coded thing at the time. Was this was kind of a rupture, because you had all these Democratic Party figures and cultural liberals such as Howard Schultz coding trade and free trade as a progressive phenomenon. And the scene where Schultz is interviewed at the Sonics game is so interesting, because he says, like, "Oh, well, our coffee is ethically sourced, so I don't know what you're talking about. We already do this." And you see the same kind of thing happening now, where he's like, "Well, there's no need for a union because we're Starbucks."
Yeah, just trust us. We're doing it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
his appearance fortunately gets a laugh in almost every screening, because the reporter intros him by saying Howard Schultz can't understand why his store was targeted.
right.
Like, he has no idea, really.
Yeah, and that's the fascinating thing too, is there's this sort of plausible deniability that comes with this phase of, I guess, globalization, for lack of a better term, where there's so many different entities and firms and companies that are outsourcing to each other, that nobody really has to take responsibility. They can say, like, "Oh, we got this waiver that said it's ethical coffee. what that other company, that's not us. They're doing bad stuff. We have no control over this. And yeah, Starbucks, Nike, they were real experts at this sort of perception management.
Yeah, totally. Also, really interesting is that in regard to these, the broken windows, what have you, media also pushed that so many local businesses were targeted and all this. It was Pacific Northwest conglomerates. Like it was Nike, it was Starbucks. Smaller businesses may have lost revenue by losing shoppers for a few days, but they were not targeted, and that was just peddled in a very. Everyone's afraid of the small business being destroyed by the protesters. No, no proof in our footage anywhere of that happening.
Interesting. Huh. That's
They
yeah, I
really
didn't realize that.
they use the idea of the small businesses being destroyed to defend the big businesses is kind of
course,
the rope a dope you get every time there's a protest like this.
Yeah, and to scare everyone to be like, well, a small business could be my business. It's
Yeah.
everything. If it's not a giant corporation, it's a small business. Yeah, so it's just a way to spread that fear. Also, a great moment from that same morning broadcast with Howard Schultz was when the reporter is going out to the stores after the first day of protests and is trying to show the destruction, as she calls it. And she points out graffiti on the side of a building that has nothing to do with anything and probably was there already. And also goes, and look at down here, all the garbage cans. And she's pointing to dumpsters that were just in an alleyway. And again, we're supposed to be horrified. Then she's there lamenting that the Pottery Barn was closed,
Yeah.
which
Before
is
this
the real tragedy of this whole thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
This protest, they've brought all this sad music to Seattle, which wasn't there before. Angsty teen stuff.
They're making it rain.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. If people do want to check out the film or support, how can they do that, and how can they find more of your work?
Yeah, so we just opened theatrically. We started with a week-long run in New York City, but we are playing theatrically throughout the country on a rolling basis through at least the middle of 2026. I do want to just say where it's coming up next. At least in January, we're going to be in Kingston, New York, at the Upstate Midtown Theater on January 7th. We're going to be at Spectacle Theater in Brooklyn.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, January 9th, 11th, 20th, and 31st. That's going to be in a double feature with Hello Dankness. We're going to be in Lawrence, Kansas in January, Birmingham, Eugene, Oregon. We hit Pleasantville, New York, at the Jacob Burns Center in February. But yeah, this is we're on a rolling basis. Basically, we want to show this as much as we can to whoever we can. So I tell people, if you want it in your city, please contact us on the website, WTO99doc, WTO99doc.com. We have you can email us through that and let us know if you want it in your city. Also, I recommend hitting up any indie theaters by you, letting them know you want to see it as well. That also helps. But another thing we're doing university screenings. We've done a few of those, but a big one is hitting up activist groups, and we offer private screenings for any group that might want it. We've done a lot of DSA chapters throughout the country, and that is growing. But not only DSA, we have land rights groups, food co-ops, the Amansare People's Project in El Paso. We've done many of these, and we want to keep doing those too. So I really push you to hit us up on the website. We will make it happen for you in some form. But we just want this to be seen. We want it to get out there. We want people to learn these seeds were being planted a long time ago, and this shit doesn't just come out of nowhere.
Oh yeah. Well, I am at Anders Lee here on social media, and if you're in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, this coming Friday, 12/26, we're going to be doing our annual post-holiday comedy show. Me and Alex Colliard, as well as our pal Joe Cocazello, a lot of other fun comics on the lineup as well. That'll be at Bryant Lake Bowl at 7 p.m. Put a link to that, as well as to the was WTO 99 doc.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay. We'll put
WTO99doc.com.
in case people can't even remember that. We'll put it right in the description for you. Click that link. Jake?
Yeah, when I Googled how does Fraser feel about the WTO protests, the documentary came up pretty high in the Google hits. So that means it's doing pretty good. I think it's making the rounds. That's a good sign, which means it's good quality. Everyone should check it out. I don't really have anything coming up. So just, keep listening, and please hang out in the Discord and sign up for the Patreon if you enjoy the show, because it's helping us keep doing the show. And I'm unemployed right now, so give me your money. And argue with me about Frasier. I think that's it for me. So that's the show. Thank you for joining us. It's finished.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.